Ronnie O'Sullivan. Now, if you're not into snooker, if you don't like snooker, if you don't follow snooker, then you probably don't know who Ronnie O'Sullivan is. Snooker's not one of the most popular sports in the world, but Ronnie O'Sullivan is, for me, and for most snooker fans, I think, clearly the best snooker player in history. He is amazing. People use the word genius all the time now. If you can stand up and play a guitar at the same time, you're a genius. But Ronnie O'Sullivan, when he's playing snooker, is a genius. He's not a genius. He doesn't seem like a genius in interviews. You know, he doesn't seem like extremely intelligent. But he has a genius. He has a genius for the game of snooker. He can just play it much better than anybody else in history, and he can do it with both hands. But there was always a problem with Ronnie. He became a professional when he was 16. He started winning immediately. He was winning trophies at 16, 17. Now he's won everything. He's 6 times world champion, 7 times Masters champion, whatever you want. He's like the living Pele in the snooker world. But he was heavily criticised for a long time, Ronnie O'Sullivan, because he was erratic and he was very emotional. And there were times when he was playing snooker and you could see he wasn't interested. And even then he was better than most. And sometimes he used to quit. He'd officially quit and say, right, I'm not playing snooker anymore. I don't like it, you know. And he was heavily criticised, especially in the media, because he's very famous in England because snooker's quite a popular game or sport, whatever it is. So everyone knows who Ronnie O'Sullivan is. And he was crucified, really, by the media for his attitude. Look at this kid here. He's got all this money, all this success, and he's behaving like this. And, you know, some people have to work for a living, not play snooker and get big money every time you win a game. And so they were actually very aggressive with him, much like they were with Amy Winehouse. But what wasn't really in the public domain so much was the reason why Ronnie O'Sullivan behaved like that and the reason why he felt like that. And it was really curious, and it's actually the reason that he was so good at snooker at the same time. So I'll explain what I mean. Ronnie O'Sullivan is actually Ronnie O'Sullivan Jr. So his father, obviously, is Ronnie O'Sullivan Sr. And Ronnie O'Sullivan Sr. was a gangster in London, a very serious gangster. And the gangsters in London traditionally love snooker clubs. They do a lot of the business in snooker clubs. You go in, it's private, it's quite dark, it's very quiet. You don't want anyone shouting when you're trying to play snooker. So it's a good place to meet and do deals, and they're privately owned. And so, the criminal fraternity in London particularly does favour snooker clubs to do their business. And so Ronnie O'Sullivan Sr. was always going to these snooker clubs. He was in there every day, doing a deal, having a meeting, making a threat, making a plan. And he was very close to his son, Ronnie Jr. And he used to take his son into these snooker clubs and just say, go on, Ronnie, or go on, son, whatever he called him, go and have a game of snooker. And then he'd talk to his criminal compadres, And it quickly became apparent that Ronnie O'Sullivan Jr. had an incredible talent for snooker. They didn't really notice at first, but then they just kept hearing the sound of dink, the balls going in the pockets, and one after another, and they started watching him, and they thought, oh my God, this kid's amazing. And he was so good that by the time he was 11 years old, he was being interviewed on the television because he was destroying adult professional snooker players. And then he turned pro when he was 16 and became a worldwide sensation. And what I find really interesting about that is that you could look at that as a very sad story. He's close to his father. He grows up with his father. Then his father commits a murder, and this is what happened. He killed the driver and bodyguard. It's one person, driver, bodyguard, of Charlie Cray, who's the older brother of the Cray twins, world famous. There's a film called Legend, in which Tom Hardy plays both twins, Ronnie and Reggie Cray. And their older brother, Charlie Cray, had a bodyguard and a driver. This is a high-profile criminal in London. And Ronnie O'Sullivan, Sr., killed him. He executed him in gangland execution. And so he went to prison. And he was given a life sentence and he went to prison. And that's why Ronnie O'Sullivan was going through all these emotional moments and having all this turmoil in his life, because his dad was doing life for murder. And nobody realised that at the time. And they were very cruel to him. You've got to remember, this guy turned pro when he was 16. So when he was 21, 22, he'd been in the game for years. He was famous. But he was only a kid. And he's dealing with the fact that his dad's doing life for murder. And in the end, he did 17 years. He was in prison for 17 years. But I think for me, the unexpected and very unusual bright side of all this is that if his father had not been a criminal, he would never have taken him to the snooker clubs every day. And Ronnie O'Sullivan Jr. would have never discovered his talent, and the world would have been robbed of the best snooker player that we've ever seen. So that's a bittersweet story there of the O'Sullivans.